Hello all. We'll be discussing in this video, we'll be discussing the demand schedule, demand curve and the various movements and shifts that might happen to a demand curve. Okay. So for that, the first thing that we should understand is your demand schedule. So in the previous video, we had discussed what demand, market demand and individual demand is. So I'm going to write it here so that we can get an idea of it. Now let's assume for a specific amount of price, you have a specific amount of demand. As you know earlier, as price increases, demand decreases, and as price decreases, demand increases. So using the same concept, I'm going to write here. I'm going to start off with, let's assume the price is ₹1, the demand would be for 10 units. As the price increases to, let's assume 3, the demand would be for 7 units. And as price increases to 6, let's assume the demand now also reduces to 5 units. Now this is directly, this is very true for this. If you can see this here, it is an inversely proportional relationship. The price and demand has an inversely proportional relationship. But in the specific case, as you can see here, it might be my own demand. Okay, it might be my own demand, so it is my individual demand. It can also be the demand for this entire market. However I write it, when I represent it like this, it is my demand schedule. It is my demand schedule. Now demand schedule means it is I've written the demand in terms of numbers in a tabular format. So this is basically, this entire thing is in a tabular format. So when I write this information in a tabular format or in the format of a table, it is known as a demand schedule. Now when I convert the same thing, when I convert the same data into, let's assume, in this format, when I convert the same data into this format, it means now it is a demand curve. So this is a demand schedule and this is a demand curve. So demand curve is derived from the demand schedule. So first you need to have data which is presented, let's say in a tabular format, and then you convert that into a graphical format. When you convert that into a graphical format, it becomes a demand curve. So this is your graphical demand curve, is the graphical representation of a demand schedule. So let me start off with how a demand curve generally functions so that you have an idea of how this functions. Okay. So as I said before, the basic premise of a demand curve is, one thing is, as price increases, demand decreases, and as price decreases, demand increases. So this is the basic premise. Okay. So because the law of quantity, law of demand, they both have an inversely proportional relationship. Okay. So I'm going to write some data here so that we can plot the same data in a graph. Okay. I'm going to write price and I'm going to write demand. Okay. So the same data that I'm going to write here. For example, you have price is 1, demand is 10, price is 3, demand is 7, and price is 6, demand is 5. Now this similar data I'm going to plot it in a graph here, in a demand curve. Okay. So whenever you write on this axis, you always write it as quantity demanded. And this is your price. I'm going to put simple numbers here so that you can understand how a graph is plotted here. So I'm going to start off with your demand, which is generally I'm going to start off with 5, with 7, and then with, let's assume it is 10. Okay. And similarly, there is 1, there is 3, and there is 6. Okay. So for 1, you can see that the demand is here. For 3, the demand is here. And for 6, the demand is here. So if I plot it like this is my demand curve. So this is my demand curve. So as you can see, this demand curve is also, it has a negative slope. This demand curve has a negative slope. Negative slope means you need to understand what a positive slope is. If two things have similar relationships, there will be a positive slope which goes like this. Okay. So whenever you see like this is actually a positive slope. And if you see a data set that moves like this, which causes the graph to be like this, it is a negative slope. So that means there is an inverse relationship. Here you have a positive relationship. The demand curve, as you can see here, has an inverse relationship. That is, whenever price increases, as you can see here, whenever price increases, demand decreases. In this case, as you can see here, the price, when it was very small, when it was 1, you had a demand of 10. Now, as the price increased to 3, the demand also decreased to 7. As the price increased to 6, the demand decreased to 5. So this is how you can say that there is a negative relationship or an inverse relationship with price and demand, and this is represented in the demand curve. I hope you've understood the concept, because now we'll have to move on to the next thing, which is why this happens. Why do you have an inverse relationship between demand and price? As you can see, I've told you that there is this inverse relationship, but what are the reasons for this inverse relationship? The first reason is law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that whenever you consume more, the utility that you derive from that specific commodity comes down. Okay. So in the same context, as price for the same commodity increases, the utility that you derive from that commodity starts to decrease, because you're paying the same price or a higher price for the same product. So that might be a problem. The second thing is your income effect. Now, income effect means as you've seen before, as income increases, okay, we've discussed this before, as income increases, the demand of products increases. Okay, but just assume if you have only a steady income. For example, I'm just going to give an example here for income effect. Okay. Let's assume a person has an income of 100 rupees. Okay, and he was buying, let's assume 10 kgs at 10 rupees. If the price of the commodity increases, okay, the price of the commodity increases to, let's assume, 20 kgs, 20 rupees per kg, he can now only buy 5 kgs because his income is still 100 rupees. So this happens if you have a steady income, and this is the income effect. So because of this, if the price increases and you have the same income, your demand would decrease. That is another reason for an inverse relationship between demand and price. Next is the substitution effect. Now, substitution effect in this context would mean that whenever you feel that some product is now at a very high price and you have a similar substitute to it, you will always switch on to it. So because of that, the demand for the primary product would decrease. Now, as we've seen before in the case of tea and coffee, let's assume the demand for tea goes up, okay, because everybody wants tea. Okay. But along with it, the price also goes up. And then people feel now it is not worth to buy tea at this price point. So what they'll do is they'll switch over to coffee. And because of that, the demand for tea will come down. So as the price of tea increases, the demand for tea also will come down. So that is your substitution effect, because people have other things to opt on to. Then you have change in number of consumers. Okay. As if you can see that there are a lot of people, as the number of consumers increase, okay, the demand will increase. As the number of consumers decrease, the demand would decrease. That is a normal logic. Now, how does it increase or result in an inverse relation with price and demand? If the price of a commodity increases, the number of people buying that commodity would come down. As the number of people buying that commodity comes down, the demand would also come down. Now, if the price of a commodity decreases, the number of people buying the commodity would increase, thereby resulting in a higher demand. So it relates to a specific concept. Then you have multiple uses of a commodity. Now, if a commodity has multiple uses, now what people will do is they will use it. If the price of a commodity increases, they will use it for the best possible reason only. The classic example is gold. You know, gold has a lot of physical properties, but people don't tend to use it everywhere because it is very expensive. As the price of gold goes up, people will start using it only for very specific uses like ornaments. They'll stop using it for some other things like maybe conductor of electricity. Some cars use it, high-end cars use it, but after some time they might feel that it's too expensive to use it. So that might be another reason. Now, you might see that there is a shift in demand. Okay. Now, shift in demand in the specific context is a shift in demand curve. Okay. A shift in demand curve, as you can see that there is a demand curve which is present, and you will move on to how this shift happens. And this shift happens due to many reasons, which we'll discuss in the next video. Thank you.